Who remembers the name Fabricio Bruno? No? Well, let me either enlighten you or remind you of who he is. We are rumoured to have made a bid for the player, but it's not the first time we've chased him for his signature. Back in 2024, so summer of 2024, when the transfer window was in full swing, West Ham were led to believe that they had agreed a deal with the Brazilian international and the then Flamengo centre back. But it was not meant to be. And I'll come to why the transfer didn't happen in a moment. Now, before I do, if you're new to the West Ham Voice, or if you've watched the channel before but yet to become a subscriber, a QR code is appearing in the top corner there. If you click on that after the show, you can subscribe to the channel free of charge, and subscription is free. And if you like the show, you can click on the like button, and you can also click on the hype button that's below the video. And the hype button allows other viewers on YouTube to watch this video. So you kind of be promoting the video for me, if you like. You can also become a member of the West Ham Voice. Membership $1.99 a month gives you additional content, and all the money raised goes to Prostate Cancer UK through the membership scheme. Right, let's carry on. So with the January transfer window being exactly 3 weeks away, the rumours are building, and if there are no new transfer stories to tell you about, then why not regurgitate one from the past? West Ham transfer rumours are pretty good at repeating stories of old. I lose count of the number of times that we've been meant to be chasing a player, and then the rumour dies down for one reason or another, such as that player ends up signing for another club, or we find that the rumour was just that, rumour with no substance. Or in the case of Fabricio Bruno, the deal that was offered to him back in June 2024 was simply not good enough for him to leave Brazil for the bright lights of London town. Does it surprise me that a story broke out on Tuesday suggesting now that we're back in to sign the Brazilian centre-back? Well, it should surprise me, and then again it doesn't. You see, he only just joined Cruzeiro in a £7 million deal from Flamengo. That was at the beginning of this year. So, back in the summer of 2024, Fabricio Bruno was rumoured to be heavily linked to West Ham. Julen Looetegui had just arrived as manager, and Bruno was touted to be his first signing. A fee of around £12.5 million to £15 million was agreed with his then club Flamengo. Personal terms were apparently being discussed, and even Fabrizio Romano gave it his famous "here we go" stamp, making fans believe that the deal was done. But then the deal collapsed, and we signed Max Kilman instead for nearly 3 times the value. The usual criticism was levied at the board and in particular David Sullivan, but as the story unravelled, we started to understand why the deal didn't happen in the first place. Bruno was reported to have demanded a weekly wage of 100 grand a week. Apparently, West Ham didn't offer a significant improvement over Bruno's Flamengo contract in terms of salary and contract length, so he opted to stay in Brazil. Bruno, interestingly, was offered a better deal before the summer transfer window had opened. Now, West Ham felt that a demand of 100 grand a week was excessive for a player who was untested in the Premier League. Bruno, as I've said, had received a pay increase, an improved salary, an improved contract at the beginning of 2024, which made him one of the highest earners at the club back then. Although there are no official figures to go on, it was suggested that Bruno's new salary at Flamengo was in the region of £35,000 to £40,000 a week. Now, it's very likely that West Ham would have offered significantly more than that for him to come to West Ham, but nowhere near the 100 grand that he was demanding. So, to make an educated guess, I would imagine West Ham would have offered maybe 55, 60, maybe even 65 grand a week, but that wasn't enough. A substantial increase on what he was earning in Brazil, but for Bruno, it wasn't nearly enough to leave Brazil for what he deemed to be a place where the cost of living was higher. Well, indeed, it is very high in London. So he didn't believe that making the move was worthwhile. But then, just over 6 months after he turned the move down to West Ham, Bruno did make a transfer. He stayed in Brazil and signed for Cruzeiro for a fee of €7 million in January 2025. It was the club that he started his career at youth level. In that year, 2025, Flamengo went on to recently claim their ninth league title, whilst Cruzeiro finished third in the league. And now, almost a year later, he is again being linked to another move where there's a suggestion. Well, not a year, sorry, a year and a half later. There's a suggestion that a Premier League club, an unknown Premier League club, has made a €15 million bid for him. But is it West Ham United who's made the bid? I can't help thinking that the transfer failed because of, if it failed because of personal terms just under 2 years ago, the landscape is unlikely to have changed much since then. In order to move to London, Bruno is still likely to want a fee of around 100 grand a week, but West Ham are still unlikely to want to agree to such a term for a player who, as I've said, has only really proved himself in the Brazilian league and none of the big leagues around Europe, and certainly not the Premier League. Now, granted, Bruno is a Brazilian international, but even his position in the national side hasn't been really consistent. He was first called up for to the senior Brazilian squad back in March 2024, where he played against England in a friendly where Brazil won 1-0. But then he was dropped from the national side during Brazil's Copa America and for most of Brazil's World Cup qualifying campaign throughout 2025 itself. He only regained his place in the Brazilian starting lineup in their final qualifying game where they lost 1-0 to Bolivia. He has since played some part in almost all of Brazil's international friendlies since then, but that doesn't make him an automatic choice to be in the squad going into the World Cup finals next year. He's now 29 years of age and was very much a player that Looetegui wanted, but I can't be sure that Nuno would be so keen. Fabricio Bruno is tall, physical centre-back who defends with aggression, aerial dominance, preferring direct clearances and strong tackling. His main strengths are winning headers, one-on-one defending, and his leadership skills, whilst his main weaknesses are his lack of pace and the occasional errors in positioning. Pretty important for a defender, and we already have one player like that in central defence, being Max Kilman. Bruno's a traditional centre-back, tall, physically imposing, and comfortably doing what he needs to do, defending. If he's to be compared to what we already have at West Ham United, then Bruno is probably as good as Dinos for aerial duels, probably more aggressive than the other centre-backs that we have for physical challenges, but he's much slower than the other three for pace and recovery, and not as good as any of the three we have for his passing ability, and is only considered to be good for his positioning and reading of the game. So in all honesty, I can't really see how much of an improvement he will be overall against what we already have. But I could be wrong. When we're targeting central defenders such as Charlie Creswell or the under-21 Portuguese international player Thiago Gabriel, and most recently another player from Lens, Samson Baidu, all young central defenders for around about the same sort of value, 15 odd million euros for these players, it may be slightly more, slightly less. Why would we then want to target a 29-year-old central defender who has as little or no experience of the Premier League as those three players that I've just mentioned? 20-year-old Gabriel, 23-year-old Creswell, and 21-year-old Baidu. Kind of doesn't make sense. And if anything, Gabriel, the Portuguese connection with Nuno, and Creswell being an England under-21 international, seem to be far better choices for the short and possibly the long term. So here I am thinking that there's probably an element of truth that there's a club in the Premier League that's interested in Fabricio Bruno, but I'm not so sure that it's West Ham United.